I think everyone's here now, Olivia, are they? Yeah. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Eastern Community Home's second webinar of a number of webinars. We had one this morning, which is launching the hub across the east of England. Tonight, we've got a programme which is about explaining a bit more about the Eastern Community Homes and the work that's going to do, but also drilling down into community-led housing and approaches to different ways that this can be delivered. I have a number of colleagues on the screen with me. I think what we'll do, we will go and they'll introduce themselves as they give their presentation. I think that's the agenda. We are recording the session, and I do ask if you want to ask a question, we do encourage questions. At the end, we've got a question and answer part of this webinar, but if you could please put your questions in the chat, we'll see them and respond to them, hopefully group them together if necessary as we go along. You can also use the chat if you'd like to say hello. It's a bit disconcerting. We know you're all there, but we can't actually all see each other. You can see us, but we can't see you. So if you'd like to just say hello, who you are and where you've come from in the chat as we start, that would be really useful for people to know who's on the webinar and be a bit more friendly. So I'm going to start with a presentation from myself, which is going to introduce a bit more about Eastern Community Homes. So I'm just going to load that up now. So Eastern Community Homes is a hub for the East of England for community-led housing. And it began with the rural community councils across the East of England coming together and building really on the work we've already done to support communities to deliver rural housing, affordable housing on rural exception sites. From that work, we realised that to deliver community housing, you have to do this in a similar way, and it's about enabling communities to look at their own needs for housing and really help themselves in that delivery. So we realised that to do this, we needed to come together, and there was at the same time opportunities for national funding to support the development of hubs. So the Eastern Community Homes Hub is a part of a movement of national hubs that have come together. Although this one is slightly different because it is completely for the East of England and not just one county. Part of the process, we undertook a business plan and we engaged more organisations in the hub, because what we have learned and realised is that obviously this has to be a partnership approach, and if you're going to change how this is going to be delivered, we need a good network of partners. So you'll see on the screen we've also got the East of England Local Development Association involved, and they're very much supporting us in engaging with local authorities. We've got a locality who give grants out for community-led housing and support across the region with enabling. And in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, who have had a lot of expertise from the East Cambridgeshire development and delivery of community-led housing over many years. So we all came together, wrote the business plan, and were lucky enough to get funding to develop the hub. And over the last year, although under difficult circumstances, we have been working, and we've had today really, and the launch is part of that achievement. So for some of you, you're probably new to community-led housing and the concept. It isn't new to the area, although it is a growing movement. So very much part of the hub is to make sure more homes are delivered in this way. We want to give communities a say and control of what their housing projects are. And we want to build homes that are managed and owned by local people. And this is very much what community-led housing is. And we'll have a presentation shortly, which will go into this in more detail. So why did we establish the hub? Well, the overall aim is, as I said, is to build more houses and to diversify community-led housing approaches. We need to unlock barriers and also, in some cases, speed up the process for community groups by giving extra support. We also know there is an increasing need for affordable housing. That's because there's been a shift, there's rising house prices, land prices are in some parts of the region very high, and also a need for homelessness, which is increasing. So we know things might need to be done differently, and we might need to involve communities differently. We also knew there was a hub that needed to engage all tiers of local government, particularly on planning policy and other policy and advice, so where it's possible. And we looked at other places where this had been achieved, particularly, for example, in the East Midlands, where they've had a hub for quite a while. We found lack of coordination across the east of England, and also a lack of availability of quality support for communities. And additionally, the Eastern Community Homes wishes to increase its support for communities. Often developing your own homes is particularly complex, and there are complications along the way. So at all stages of that, we wanted to provide that quality and qualified support to do so. So above all, I think the timing is right for this. As the communities recover from the pandemic, they're reconsidering what is a good community, how homes can be built. Can we have quality homes, carbon efficient homes, and affordable homes? And communities are looking at this themselves. So this, hopefully, Eastern Community Homes will give that support through the enabling to allow this to move forward and more community-led homes to be built. So the area covered is across the east of England. There's 50 councils, and predominantly we're two-tier councils with 5 counties, 39 districts and 6 unitary councils. So a very varied area, and also very varied communities and diverse communities at the same time. So what have we achieved in the first year? Well, the important thing is obviously to improve and increase the advice to community groups. So we have extended our network of quality community-led housing advisors. Those have come from the Rural Community Council, but also other places where we've joined that together, and you'll see some of those speaking this evening. We've developed an offer for groups, and through funding, we can now provide up to 14 hours starting advice. This will get groups started, and we do encourage if anyone's here and just got an idea or thinking about this, to get in touch. And we also have a small grant scheme. It's very small seed core money, but would help a group get started. Post of the year, we're now working with 12 new community-led housing groups offering that advice, and they've become part of the club. And we've provided networking and learning opportunities for communities to come together. The important thing of sharing and learning from each other. As I've said, this is very much about partnership and all partners. So we've also established a qualified technical advisors network, specialists in advising community-led housing, and they have met 3 or 4 times to discuss their services and support. And as schemes develop, we can use these technical advisors to support with the advice that's needed. We've also worked with local authorities, and this is through the East of England Local Government Association, and developed a local authority network. That has worked well for raising awareness of community-led housing. There's been a lot of sharing of expertise, thinking about development of planning policy, and delivery of how delivery of technical advice and support can take place. Part of this, we've asked every leader of the council to pledge support for the hub, which is a £3,000 grant for 2 years. And pleased to say that we have had good support from local authorities across all counties. Here are some of them that have supported, and I think this will allow us to move forward now to support more communities, and with the backing of those local authorities, it's absolutely vital to make this happen. So there's further information. We have a website, all the usual social media, and there's some other links there on that slide, which we can share with you afterwards. So that was a quick run through of where we've got to in a year with Eastern Community Homes and what can be promised, I think, in the future. We're now going to move on to some set presentations, and I'd like to introduce Claude Hendrickson first, who actually isn't from the east of England, but is from Leeds Community Homes. And Claude's going to speak about diversity in how we develop our homes. So Claude, if you'd like to, I think you've got a presentation, if you'd like to share that, it'll come up on the screen. I think you need to unmute your.
I've not unmuted myself. That's not a good start, is it? And thank you for that. Thank you to all at Eastern Community Homes for the invite to discuss a little bit and give you a taste on diversity, equality and inclusion. My name's Claude Hendrickson. As it was said, I'm an accredited advisor with Leeds Community Homes, which is part of People Powered Homes. Originally, when I took on the role with Leeds Community Homes, I was the BAME, LGBT and minority groups advisor. But what came evident with that work was that there are more minority groups than just ethnicity. So I now do a lot of work around equality. When I started at Leeds Community Homes, the most important goal for the project was to Black, Asian, LGBT and people with disabilities to become more involved with the community-led housing sector. And not just being part of projects, but also being leaders on projects so that to achieve equality, diversity and inclusion, the ambitions of Leeds Community Homes, People Powered Homes it's called now. To build new and refurbished homes, to create employment and enterprise. So not only is it about looking at the units that we produce, but also how we can create employment and training and even enterprise, because properties beyond the project will need to be maintained. So it's good to have a maintenance team or a group of people that do your maintenance that are user-friendly or even part of projects. And to develop a strategy for homelessness. We're working in Leeds with a group that's working with homelessness. I'm working with a group in Southport that is working with ex-veterans, because I don't know if you know that maybe 60 to 70% of all homeless men are actually ex-military people. So we're looking at doing some work with them, and also looking at newly migrated and undocumented and documented people to the UK. So when we talk about protected characteristics, when I talk about equality, diversity and inclusion, I'm not just talking about race. I'm talking about the 9 protected characteristics under the equality law. So I'm encouraging groups to look at this as going forward to ensure that they have diversity within it. And I'll take all these. Equality, diversity and inclusion is not just, I know in some areas of the country, they don't have maybe a lot of people from Black and ethnic minority groupings, but it is about, regardless of whether you have that or not, that thinking going forward having the policies that work for everybody. And when I say that, the 9 characteristics that of the groups that I mentioned before, because I do believe that going forward, that funders will be asking that question. Funders will be asking, do you have an equality and diversity policy within your organization? You know, from board, staff, and members of your groups. So even if you don't have some of these people under that characteristics within your group, are you ready if in the future somebody approaches, somebody wants to come and live in them properties? So it's very much about having a policy, a diversity policy, just like you've got an employment policy, just like you've got a membership policy, equality and diversity. I think that is going to be something that all groups will be asked. And I think the community-led sector can be a leader in this game. I think there's many big institutions that are already looking at that in light of Black Lives Matters, in light of ensuring women escaping domestic violence, you know, various groups, minority groups like that. So, and I am available to work with groups on these policies, running workshops. I'm running workshops nationally with many of the CLTs, and to create a gap chart tracking, have a document that tracks, because it's never going to be a quick fix. It may take a couple of years, but you actually have a plan of how you're going to tackle it. So on equality and diversity, I think it's what I'm pushing to everybody is that better you have a policy than be asked if you've got a policy and you don't have one. It's better going forward. And that's really it for me. I'm aware that I've only got a short time and I've got a lot of other good speakers going to speak. So I'll leave it there and I'll hand back to Kirsten. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude. It's good to have your support, and obviously it's things to bear in mind about fairness and inclusiveness. And I do think community-led housing, and because the community are designing it, is a way where we can definitely tackle that and have housing for all. So thank you, and good to have your support for Eastern Community Homes. Right, we're now going to move on to an introduction to really what is community-led housing. I realise it might be a new concept to some people tonight on the webinar, and Jenna, who is housing enabler at Cambridgeshire ACRE, is going to give a presentation to introduce this. So if you can share your screen, Jenna, it's over to you.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Jenna Brame. I'm the Hub Coordinator at Eastern Community Homes and the Rural and Community-Led Housing Development Officer at Cambridgeshire ACRE. As Claude said as well, I'm about himself, I'm also one of the accredited advisors through the Community-Led Homes scheme for Eastern Community Homes as well. If my slide would like to move, there we go. So yeah, so just to give you kind of a brief introduction to community-led housing, it's a community kind of participation kind of activity where people can take control of their kind of local housing needs and matters, creating homes that are wanted and needed in their area, and kind of really creating something bespoke that's tailored to the community that's developing that project. It really benefits like a local community or group. That can be someone that's based geographically, shared belief or shared interests. So it can really kind of tackle a real big range of needs, and there's a variety of models that can be used to do that. I'm going to give you a bit of a brief introduction to that in a few minutes, but I won't go into too much detail because there's some great presentations coming later that will give you a bit more information about that. So why do people kind of do community-led housing? So ultimately it's control over your local housing needs. You can influence the development that's taking place in an area. You can manage who's going to live in those homes, how they're going to be maintained and kind of managed in the future, and really keep them as a really valuable community asset. In most situations, a lot of these homes are provided as affordable homes permanently, that keeps people in the local communities, builds strong communities, and really helps kind of address some of the big housing issues that we're seeing at the moment, that have especially been exacerbated by the COVID crisis. And obviously a lot more people looking for housing and kind of different needs housing to what they probably previously were. Again, it's a locally focused project. It really addresses local needs and doesn't necessarily, it kind of addresses some of the concerns that people might have about other traditional forms of development, and helps people get involved with developing their own local area. It also helps create better designed homes, so that might be those with more environmental focus, or those that kind of meet the needs better. So for example, having kind of a local community centre where people can engage rather than just everyone being kind of centred in their own private homes, is that real kind of sense of community and kind of a joint effort to bring something forwards. It doesn't just have to be housing as well. So it can be other community assets that people want to bring forward. So that can be things like shops, bakeries, pubs, playgrounds, workspaces, and anything the community really wants to use and make as a valuable asset for their area. And kind of summing up everything that I've said so far, it's just creating stronger communities that can address their needs and make the area something that's really valuable and a treasured asset for years to come. So going through the models quickly, community land trusts, these are usually they are always not-profit and community-run schemes that will be run for community benefit, not the people actually setting up the CLT, but rather for their wider community, and they tend to be for affordable housing. Next model is co-housing. So these are intentionally created communities. Again, this can be shared belief or shared kind of interests. They're balanced between privacy and community. So each household will have their own independent household, but also there'll be a shared area, which won't just be for the benefit of the people living in the scheme, but can also be an asset for the wider community and really provide for that local area. Housing cooperatives. These are community membership kind of schemes. The residents have complete control over kind of decisions that are made there. Typically, you've probably heard of them most commonly as student housing schemes, kind of as they provide security and fairness in keeping rents affordable, and ensuring that that's always maintained through kind of a democratic model where the residents are in control of that and make the decisions jointly. Self-build, this isn't specifically a model on its own, but it's quite often a way people bring forward can bring forward their housing. They can influence design and build their own home. Obviously not everyone takes this route, but it's really good sometimes for those that want to have an environmentally eco-friendly way of building development. So how is like community-led housing being supported? So local plans can help bring forward kind of allocated sites and policies that will support community-led housing and help to bring them forward in the future. Supplementary planning documents are usually used to support this as well, or can be used to support this. There can be bespoke community-led housing policies. As an example, in our region, East Cambridgeshire have done this, and they're a very supportive district council, kind of working on a model similar to rural exception sites, where kind of there being a proven need and allowing kind of small development outside of the development envelope. It also allows for including elements such as small business units, renewable energy, and other appropriate uses. Neighbourhood planning has been a really another useful tool, because it can help communities kind of dictate where, when, and what type of housing is brought forward. We had an example of this in Southwold, which is allowing CLH groups to build permanently affordable housing on areas where there was previously community or employment land that is no longer needed for those purposes. And the planning white paper that came out last year also, it kind of fits in line with the government's intentions there in terms of meeting the needs of communities. So it definitely fits in kind of where policy seems to be going. So a little bit of summary of how you can get involved. So the kind of people you need to approach are your local authority, parish councils, community groups, potentially housing association or developer if that's the kind of partnership you want to take forward. And of course your community-led housing hub. As Kirsten said earlier, these are dotted all around the country. We just cover the eastern region, and obviously happy to help if anyone wants to get in touch with us. So kind of what tools could you use? Community engagement events. So this could be, again, parish councils, neighbourhood planning groups, or any community groups that are out there and potentially could be a platform to bring a group together. Neighbourhood planning, again, kind of pre-existing group. There'll be people who are interested in bringing forward housing, and it's a good platform for getting those policies in place if it's something the community really wants to pursue. Housing needs surveys, this is something that probably comes a bit later in the process, but will really help kind of identify the need and bring forward a scheme that would really be tailored to the local area. Just to cover a few things that might be worth thinking about if you're a group that's at the early stages, or you might be further along, you might already have a group, but some things that are worth thinking about, even maybe potentially before you approach one of your advisors, kind of the vision and values behind your scheme. So what it is that you're wanting to achieve, where you want to be based, and really what the ultimate outcomes are of your project. In terms of scheme, you might want to think about which model you want to use, the number of homes, tenures, who will live there, and again, maybe some more design aspects of the scheme as well, as how you'll manage and maintain, how you'll design it, what materials, and what is kind of the best suited model to what you're trying to achieve. Legal and policy issues, Claude's just covered obviously kind of equality, diversity and the value of having that considered, also governance and incorporation, so how you're going to incorporate, and obviously that's something the hub or an advisor can help you with as well. And finance, obviously big question normally, how people are going to fund things, and it may be exploring your options of how you can fund it, exploring the people you've got in your group and the kind of income and equity you've already got available, and kind of things you need to budget for and now and once the scheme is completed. So yeah, that's a bit of a crash course in community-led housing, but yeah, these are my details, and please get in touch if you need any help for us. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Jenna. That was a good, excellent run through to just give an introduction to what community-led housing is. We're now going to move forward with the next three presentations, which are going to drill down a bit more into the approaches. I noticed some in the chat have been saying, could they know more about some of the things Jenna said? So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of that in these presentations, and then we can follow up with the question and answers afterwards. So I'm now going to introduce Emily, who's going to share her presentation. Emily is probably one of our most, is probably our most experienced advisor in the hub, because she's been advising through the first of all East Cambs District Council, wasn't it, and then Cambridgeshire and Peterborough combined authority. So Emily's got a lot of expertise and experience to share with us, I'm sure, about community land trusts. Okay, Emily, if you'd like to.
I'm just going to share my presentation. So hopefully you should be able to see that now.
Yeah.
How can I? Oh, that's better. So like Kirsten mentioned, my name is Emily Mulvaney. I work for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. I'm also an accredited community-led housing advisor, and I've been working with community-led housing groups for nearly 5 years now. Predominantly community land trusts, so that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. I'm going to take you through a very pit stop tour of community land trusts, including the history, what is a community land trust, the benefits of CLT development, some routes to delivery, and funding. So community land trusts have, I think, a really fascinating origin story. The first community land trust was actually formed in 1969 in the United States of America, and they came into existence as part of the civil rights movement. So in rural southern states, community land trusts were a way for Black communities to own land and provide more independence and sustainability for their communities. In kind of the early 2000s, CLT started to gain some interest in the UK, and a number of pilot projects were launched between 2006 and 2008. In 2008, CLTs were legally defined, so they are a legally defined type of community-led housing, and that definition was in the Housing and Regeneration Act in 2008. In 2010, the National Clt Network was established, and that's kind of the umbrella network out of which all of these regional hubs have grown out of, and that was when CLTs really took off. So since 2010, around 300 CLTs have formed across England and Wales. About 1,000 CLT homes are already completed, and we have a pipeline of more than 16,000 community-led homes coming forward. There are 17,000 members of the community that are members of their local CLT, and there are also CLT movements now emerging across Europe, in Belgium, France, Italy, and over in Australia as well. So what is a CLT? A CLT essentially is a way for a village, town, or neighbourhood, any geographic area, to come together and set up a not-for-profit organisation to provide affordable housing and other benefits that trust will secure for the local community in perpetuity. So it's a community, it involves land or some kind of other asset, and it's held in trust for the community. The key features of any CLT is that they are not-for-profit. That's part of their legal definition that I mentioned on the last slide. They're governed by local trustees. CLTs are slightly different than some other community-led housing models in that the trustee board generally aren't the people that intend to live in the houses. It tends to be a voluntary role, and they tend to be bringing forward affordable housing on behalf of the wider community rather than for themselves individually. CLTs are membership-based, so anyone in the community can join as a member, usually for a nominal fee of £1, and they're democratic. So those community members ultimately will vote on the trustee board, and they have that ultimate control over the governance. CLTs will develop, own, and manage assets on behalf of the community. Any CLT project will involve a lot of community engagement throughout the process, and CLT developments tend to be very design-led and very sensitive to the local area. So rather than building homes that would look like they could have come from anywhere, they tend to reflect very closely their surrounding area. Okay. Sorry, so benefits of a CLT, why do people do it? Jenna touched on this, but to reiterate, they provide permanently affordable homes. Those are protected forever, so not subject to things like right to buy. They tend to reserve the affordable homes for people with strong local connections, and that tends to be very important in terms of ensuring that the community remains sustainable. They can bring forward community facilities. So whatever that community feels it needs, it might be a local shop, a library. One CLT I work with is developing premises for their new GP surgery. They have genuine community control and influence throughout the journey. They can provide a long-term income stream for community benefit. So if you think about rental income, in the short term, that will be paying off long-term loan finance probably. But in the longer term, that is surplus that you can reinvest in the community. And again, it all comes back to ensuring that local communities remain sustainable and thriving. And on the right here, you've got an image. This is pulled from the National Clt Network website. All of the green houses are completed CLT developments, and all of the orange dots are early stage CLTs. And this is something you can go on the website and you can click. Ooh, I clicked. You can click to see the specific developments, so you can see what developments are happening near you. So two key things that people ask about are the routes delivery and the funding. So that all sounds great, that sounds like a good idea, but how do you actually do it and who pays for it? So the key thing to remember with community land trusts and any community-led development is that no one size fits all. They are all inherently unique and different by nature, but there are a few standard routes that you do tend to see. So partnering tends to be a big route to delivery for community-led housing groups, and whether that's partnering with a housing association or existing housing organisation, partnering with a private developer whereby the CLT develops in partnership with that developer and they take on the affordable element of the scheme, partnering with a local authority, particularly where that local authority might own land, or partnering with a private landowner. CLTs can also develop completely on their own, but that is more unusual. And similarly to how the routes to delivery are all different, the long-term management is different with all CLTs as well. CLTs can be very involved in the long-term management and stewardship of homes, or they can take a more hands-off approach via partnering with various organisations. So finally, I'm going to come on to funding, because that's the other big question is, well, who pays for it all? And again, it depends on how you are delivering the housing. That is the key difference in how different projects are funded. But generally, funding can be split into three key categories, which are startup funding, pre-development funding, and the development and long-term finance. So startup funding, roughly around £5,000, and often might be available from your local authority or other small grant funders. The National Clt Network previously ran a startup grant fund, and we run a startup grant fund at the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough combined authority of £5,000 per group. That tends to get CLTs up and running, set up and with a good membership base. And then you move on to pre-development funding. This depends, this depends on what development route you're taking. So if you're partnering, your development partner might come up with the pre-development funding. There are also grants available, for example, from Homes England under the Community Housing Fund, and there are short-term flexible loan finance options. And then finally, the development and long-term finance. Again, potentially provided by a development partner, or there are several ethical lenders that we work with that are interested in CLT projects and will happily lend to CLT projects. So that's it from me. Those are my contact details. So particularly in, I've just realised I've spelled my email address wrong. So Peterborough is not actually spelled like that. But if you are interested in community-led housing, particularly in the Cambridgeshire area, please do get in touch either via Eastern Community Homes or directly. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. I think what that proves is, because it's so many different routes, it's quite bespoke to each CLT, and that's really why the advice is needed, and that sharing between different groups through Eastern Community Homes. Okay, we're going to move on now to Giles, who's from Community Action Hertfordshire, who's, I always get this wrong, he'll tell me I've got it wrong, but which is the Rural Community Council, I'll say that, in Hertfordshire, and Giles is their enabler, and he's going to drill down a bit more now in what was asked earlier about co-housing. So Giles, if you'd like to share your presentation.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me and see this. Yes, I'm Giles Meredith. It's actually CDA Herts, Kirsten, but I'll let you off. And I'm the community-led housing advisor in Hertfordshire. And I have to say before I start, I'm not an expert in co-housing, but I've done some research and I'm happy to share what I've learned. And I think what I've learned is of interest to lots of people because it's a really positive story. So I'm just going to explain a little bit more about it, talk about some of the challenges in co-housing. I'm going to go through some examples of it, perhaps give some motivation of why you might want to get involved in co-housing, and talk about some key attributes of not just the developments themselves, but the people who might get involved. And here's a, well, I don't know, is this an early example of co-housing? This is Tintern Abbey before Henry VIII started objecting to co-housing quite aggressively. Lots of shared facilities and a rather beautiful environment, perhaps more beautiful as a ruin. So what is co-housing? So some key features of it. Co-housing isn't identifiable as a particular model, but it is identifiable as having people who've come together with the same interests to build housing with shared elements at the core of what's on offer. So we're looking at some shared space and potentially facilities, and this is often referred to as a common house. And one of the sort of key things about this is that it's important to think of the common house and the shared facilities as part of the whole project, not just a separate cost. And there are common values shared amongst the participants. And the participants in co-housing usually get involved in the management and running of the place where they live and have a degree of control over it. And there's a potential, as with other forms of community-led housing, to cut out some of the developer profit, which then has the effect of making it more affordable. There isn't a particular community-led housing ownership model associated with co-housing. It could be a community land trust, you could have a cooperative, and there could be elements of self-build or none at all. But it's equally possible to have traditional ownership. The shared element is really what's important. It is a more common model in Europe. I think Europeans are slightly more grown up about sharing their spaces. And Ecology in Innsbruck is quite a good example. When I've been to a sustainable project, looks like this. This is 11 units. These are the doors. They have an external stairway because they wanted not to waste space. And this is north facing, so all the occupied space is on the other side. So the ecological reasons were why these people decided to get together. So there are some challenges. Getting a group together for the long haul for co-housing can be very challenging. I think some of the schemes have taken a very long time. So people may get other jobs, they might move away, they might pass away. They might lose patience and find other alternatives, or lose interest, or their interests simply don't match the wider co-housing group anymore. Things change over time. So getting a core group together who are committed to the core ideals or ideas is essential. And there are challenges involved in managing the ownership in co-housing schemes, because if you're sharing a space with someone, you need to be able to get along with them and for them to share your values. And finance is also a problem, as it is for lots of community-led housing schemes. So there's an example of Lilac, which is a co-housing scheme in Leeds, which tackled the difficulties of accessing housing by forming a mutual home ownership society. I put some links in there, so it's worth having a look at that, so that people could access mortgages. And another thing, of course, is that if you're going to get a diverse group of people together, they don't all have the same amount of money. So balancing people's finances can be a challenge in terms of offering them fair and equal places to live. And then finally, educating stakeholders in the development process. And by that, I mean planners, builders. This is not something that is traditionally done very much in this country. So some more help with policies that positively engage with co-housing would be useful. So here are some few examples. At the top, we've got the older women's co-housing, which is in Barnet, which is, I think, the oldest established one in the UK. Cannock Mill in Colchester, and I've put links to all of these. Marmalade Lane in Cambridge. And then Sutton Street in Norwich. I've tried to concentrate on the east of England, which is one where the development hasn't started yet, but they've acquired some land. And then I've included Brighton Hove CLT at the bottom there, because if you go to their website, it's a very good video about Lawton Lodge, which is worth a look. I think the thing about all of these people, not only do they share their housing, but they're really keen on sharing their ideas. All of their websites have got excellent information about what they're doing. So here's Cannock Mill Co-housing. They have the environmental credentials of their schemes, very important to them. Their shared house is up here. This was an initiative they did. They got together to knit, not knit, they don't knit scrubs, do they? Sewed together scrubs as part of their response to the COVID-19 crisis. It's, you know, I think it's a beautiful place to live, and quite recently completed. And I think they're going to be talked about in the case study session, which is running tomorrow. Definitely worth hearing from them. And this is the older women's co-housing. Again, very inspirational people. And I ringed the bit which I thought was important. This is blurb taken from their own website. These are the, again, highly environmentally sustainable houses with terrific energy performance. The community is actively managed by us, its residents. Everyone has opportunity to share in the life of the group and contribute in whatever way she can. Their willingness to share at Ouch, if I'm analytical on that, even goes as far as putting policies they've developed for how you do deal with things like resolving conflict when you're living with other people. I like the maturity of it. It says we are going to have conflict, but this is how we're going to manage it. And this is Marmalade Lane in Cambridge, which is award-winning, quite an interesting scheme in lots of respects. Not affordable particularly, but elements of shared living, sustainability, very important to it. And again, it's going to be talked about in the case study session tomorrow, and really fascinating too. So just a few things about getting started. Why do it? Well, people are interested in perhaps living slightly differently, interested in community and having the ability to socialize. The environment seems to come into lots of these schemes, a shared interest in sustainability. People get involved in co-housing because they want to be part of a particular group, and also to deal with affordability and simply wanting to do things differently. Now, I've put on the attributes there, I've highlighted a few things. I think the key attribute is being able to build and sustain a group, keep it going, setting common goals and values. Stamina is something that comes up from, I think, all of these groups that I've had experience of. It takes a long time, but all of them have said absolutely it is worthwhile going on the journey because they've ended up with something different and just another way of living. Yeah, so patience, getting help. So I'll just go back a sec. And yeah, at the bottom there, also highlighted, you know, if you are interested in this, do make use of the examples from groups who've done it, and obviously look for some help from us. We can help put you in touch with people and give you the advice, hopefully, that you need. And then in the in the light of the pandemic, this is something I found my co-housing community helps fight coronavirus isolation, helps fight isolation more generally, I think it can do. And this is a lady from Ouch talking about her experience of living in co-housing during the pandemic. And it said, they've not only survived, but they've thrived. And I think she's just celebrated her 90th birthday. So I think that's it for me. My details are there. I think I've spelt my email address correctly, unlike others. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Giles. I think people will be thinking about living differently going forward, and that's a good example of how you can do that and how people can support each other within a community, particularly different groups. Okay, we're going to move now to our last presentation before the questions, and that's Laura from Rural Community Council from Essex. And Laura's going to speak something very different actually about self-build. So Laura, if you'd like to start your presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll just do that now. Hopefully you can all see that. Great, well, thank you very much, Kirsten. My name's Laura Atkinson and I am the accredited community-led housing advisor for Essex. I'm also the rural housing enabler with the Rural Community Council of Essex. So today I am going to touch on self and custom build. So what is self-build? Well, it's kind of what you'd expect it to be, really. It's commissioning or building a home that's tailored to really what you would want it to be. So this can be designed around your own requirements, suits your lifestyle, as well as your budget. As I think we've seen with other presentations tonight, projects do vary enormously, and it's quite a flexible model of delivery. So it could be that you want to deliver a DIY self-built home where an individual or a group choose the design that they want and do most of the building work themselves. And that's either as an individual or as part of an intentional community project. Or it could be a project where the individual or group arranges for someone else to build their home, but the groups remain in control of who does the work and what is built. And this can include the kit home companies. Community self-build groups essentially facilitate people to build their own homes on plots either they sell or lease to them. Plot passports are often involved, which set out the parameters and information for your build. And this is really around the rules and guidelines for what you can build on a site, taking into account the surroundings and the rest of the site. Design codes as well can be used, and these ensure quality of build and provide the high level rules. And this is particularly useful for larger schemes as they really shape the design parameters of that particular scheme. Custom build is generally easier than self-build because the plots and the planning permission and the services are usually provided as part of the site. And custom build is really where the property is already developed and the resident has the opportunity to customise the internal layouts and finishes from a menu of options. As with all things, land and finance are critical factors to determine the success of your project. Self-build, the inspiration really for self and custom build, like Giles was just saying about co-housing, has come from Europe. The knowledge of the European models has provided inspiration for us in the UK. And in particularly in Berlin, for example, build groups account for around 10% of new homes built in the city. And this is all to do with the good support of their local council. And this ranges from a small scale home in Cologne, where 16 homes were self-built by friends, to somewhere like Almere in Holland, which was much more adventurous and large scale, where they came together to build 3,000 homes. And these homes came with a passport, and with some specified the main restrictions, but other than that, the self-builders were pretty much able to do what they wanted. And although this does sound a little bit like chaos, it actually brought through quite a lot of diversity of property, and many have been impressed by the architectural innovation that was displayed in these properties. Like with all community-led projects, there are, no doubt challenges, and and it can be quite a time-consuming process. However, it's very clear that in the research that I've done, to look at that there are clear benefits to self-building as a community or your own home. And these benefits extend to both the builder and to the local authority. The ability to engage your community, to engage yourself at a really granular level as to what you actually want out of a building and out of a community appears to be one of the main drivers to do this, as well as innovation and looking at eco-friendly possibilities and sustainable homes that that can work out cheaper in some cases. Another really huge benefit will be the feeling of the importance of the journey. I think Giles touched on this, as much as the final product of the home. So it's about learning new skills, about using skills that are valuable in a development process, including existing skills of a group, which might be financial expertise, architectural, legal, minute taking, bookkeeping, all sorts of skills that you can use within your community to bring forward a scheme. The benefits of the local authority are very similar around community engagement and innovation, but particularly the benefit will rest with the assistance with their self-build register, which I'll touch on a bit later in the presentation. I'm going to just give you a couple of examples of self-build schemes. They're both actually community land trusts, and they're both in Devon. But I think they provide quite a good example of how communities have come together to do a self-build scheme and how successful it can be. So the first one is St Minver in a CLT in Devon, which is in a place called Rock. And high house prices compounded by holiday lets and second homes left those on lower incomes in this parish with nowhere to rent, because the rental properties were all holiday lets, and they were unable to get onto the housing ladder. So a group of residents, in response to this, came together with the support of a local builder, parish councillor and farmer, and they developed the St Minver CLT. They started up with a grant from their local authority and were very fortunate to also get an interest-free loan from them to secure the site. But it was actually the self-builders' mortgages in the end that enabled each resident to purchase their plot, and that meant the CLT could then repay the local authority loan, and they could continue with the project. Essentially, I've put a couple of video links, so when you get the presentations round, do click on them, because actually the videos are inspirational and it's a really powerful commentary on their experience of developing in this way. They essentially all helped each other build their own homes, and the community volunteers and the community residents who were going to be residents there but didn't have necessarily the building skills essentially became labour for the masons and the project manager, and they all just helped each other. It's really incredible. And the scheme that came eventually in 2008 was 12 affordable self-built homes, and then it was so successful they went on to complete a second project in 2011, which was quite different due to the different circumstances, but this was more a self-finished property, but it did really enable the residents to make use of sweat equity to keep the cost of the properties lower, and enabled the residents to make further savings. So I really recommend you go and have a look at that scheme if you're interested in this delivery model. The other scheme, again, I've got the video at the bottom, the link there, which is Swimby, which I like, something wonderful in my backyard. And This is again in Devon, in Broadhempstead, and this was families, 6 families came together. They, you know, this is actually a rural exception site, but they wanted to build their own homes. Sustainability and the environment were very top of their agenda, and they came together to ensure they could stay where their roots were in their communities. Some also worked locally, had children in local schools. They didn't want to be forced out, but the reality was that some of the people in these families were renting, often with the rents being increased each year, they couldn't keep up, or they were still living at home with their parents, and they really wanted to gain some independence. So these 6 families came together. They didn't have an awful lot of experience between them, but they did hire a site manager and a consultant who worked with them to make sure that they were kept on track. And the result is again really incredible. The 3 residents have come to actually write a book about their journey. So do look that up if this is something that you'd like to be more interested in, because it's a really good insight into the journey that they took to get there. I'm going to just very briefly touch on self-help. I'm sure I can't say too much because Claude Hendrickson, who you just heard speak, it was instrumental in bringing forward the frontline community self-build housing in Leeds. So I don't want to embarrass myself, I'm getting it wrong. But self-help housing is really about community organisations that enable people to solve their own housing needs, both examples here in Leeds, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. They helped young men off the streets to create their own homes, redevelop and refurbish their own homes, and they could live there afterwards. And not only did they end up with a house at the end of it, but they had skills which can be used positively to benefit their life moving forward, which is quite incredible. So yeah, I'm sure Claude will be able to answer more questions on that when I can. And finally, I wanted to touch the self-build register to make sure that everyone's aware of the registers in your local authorities. So in 2016, some legislation came in which meant that local authorities were duty bound to hold a self-build register. And if you're interested in self-building, community self-building, you can please, I would encourage you to register with your local authority, and it's open to applications for individuals and groups of people to do. The local authorities do look at this register, and they do need to have a regard for it when carrying out planning and land disposal and regeneration functions. So I would really suggest, if you're interested in this mode of delivery, to go on the register. The National Custom and Self-Build Association have a self-build portal which will help direct you and signpost you to the register that's best for you, for your area. But it also contains lots of advice and information and more case studies, some from outside the UK as well. So I would really encourage you to check that out if you can. So that's all from me. That's who I am. And if you're in Essex, then do get in touch via the hub or via my contact details there. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that. Because we have, I think in the last hour and a little bit, rattled through an awful lot of information, but we hope it's one a sort of taster of what community housing is, but also these 3 different ways of delivering it. And it strikes me they do cross over, but they all have in common community leadership, housing that's needed by different groups or different people in that community, designed by the community, and such an inspiration, actually, people using their own skills in Laura's presentation to actually do that building. It's amazing what people can achieve when they come together, and really, I think Giles used the word grit, but some of these schemes that have been the forerunners in this country, but prove that it can be done elsewhere. It can be done through in the east of England. Okay, we're going to move to the questions. There's some come in, and if anyone's got any more, they seem to be coming in on the chat function on here. So I'm going to look at the chat. Please do send them in. So Emily, when you were speaking, there's been a question about community land trusts and finding land, particularly linked to whether whether it's in the local plan or using rural exception sites. I think land is probably a big question on all of these. We know shortage and price is always tricky. So I don't know if you could give some insight into that.
Yeah, so CLTs do tend to use rural exception sites quite a lot. There's absolutely nothing saying that they can't use allocated sites. That's also fine. For any kind of community-led development, what it tends to come down to is viability. And the benefit with using rural exception sites is that they tend to have a much lower land price than allocated sites. Allocated sites are obviously the most valuable because they've already been pre-approved by the local authority for development.
Thank you. So I think what we would encourage groups to do, if they start their journey, one of those is probably looking for the land and the best way to go about that. I know from when we do the rural exception site affordable housing, it's often land comes up once you start working in a community. So don't let land put you off, because there can be, although it is a finite resource in this country, it can also be found. If it is going to be found, it will be there through different owners and different ways of doing it. I'm just looking at a lot of people saying they've been inspired, giving them food for thought. I think this is very much a new subject, and this is really what the hub's about, bringing back, giving people food for thought, but bringing together and sharing that expertise. There seems to be quite a bit about co-housing and different groups, particularly disabilities, people coming together to provide particular housing to satisfy people's needs. I don't know, Claude, do you want to say more? Because Laura did you a bit of an introduction about the project in Leeds. I wonder, now we've got you with you, it'd be really interesting to hear a bit more about that. You'll have to unmute yourself. Do you want to say a bit about your Leeds project?
Okay. Well, when again, like I said from if you want to talk to me about what the person said as regarding, somebody said about having groups with disability.
Yeah.
And I think that leads into my equality, diversity and inclusion. So it's because somebody's asked that question, the network should start looking, making that an option and start looking at it. When it comes to the Leeds project that Laura so nicely made mention of, we did that in the 90s, 94, a group of unemployed people. Again, because we had a massive housing need, we had lots of houses that were derelict in our area. Obviously, I live in an urban part of the city. So it was us taking some years unemployed as well. So, we took it on. But like I said, what we wanted to do was get skills, training, so that after the project, 20 years on, them guys still have the responsibility of maintaining the properties because they've got all the skills. A joiner lives in that house, a plumber lives in that house, an electrician lives in that house. So that is good. And taking on Laura's point about about the pride it gave us, it's amazing. We laid 92,000 bricks, 52,000. People ask me, did I count them? No, I didn't, but I did keep a track of them. But what I would say to this grouping, and what I am trying to say, is about the housing register, right? The self-build register that the local authority has. We need to be encouraging all people, whether they're in a self-build or not in a self-build, if they're in a co-housing, if they're in a refurbishment. We encourage everybody to go and register on that self-build register, because what we want to do is convince councils nationally that there's a movement of people that are interested in an alternative way of housing. It's not just about the register for self-build, it is about promoting the sector and getting as many local authorities with as long lists as possible, so that we can show to the government when we're going forward and trying to get land and trying to get planning permission, that there is a want for this more than just self-build.
Yes,
Okay.
I don't know how many
Are you
people
okay with that,
realise.
Laura?
Yeah, I don't know how many people realise about the local authority and that they all maintain this self-build register. And definitely, I quite agree, we should encourage people to look into that and register their interest in doing housing differently, really, and thinking about their local area and their local needs. I'm just looking here, we have got one question here. It's an interesting question. Do people who live in co-housing tend to ignore the wider community? I think what we're saying is that because they've got their own community and they're all self-sufficient, they may not connect with the wider community. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that. I know I've been to the Marmalade Lane community in Cambridge, and I know they've done an awful lot of outreach to the wider community around them, and actually some of the services in the Marmalade Lane, like the community room, etc., is used by the rest of the community. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer that one or has any ideas. Emily?
Just to echo what you're saying, I've worked with quite a few co-housing groups, and all of them without fail have actually felt that it's incredibly important to engage with the wider community, not just because they potentially have facilities and things that the wider community could use, like how Marmalade Lane offer their common house for community events, but also they want to be part of the community as well. They want to make connections and have friends within the wider community. So although it's perhaps doesn't seem inherent within the model, normally without fail, that is the way that they develop.
Yeah. Giles, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I can only agree with Emily, really. I think additionally, someone like the Barnet Old Women's Co-housing has 8 socially rented apartments as part of their project. So that sort of inevitably gets some cycling of people in and out of where they live. I think it can be difficult. And one of the things that seems to come up a lot is in talking to people looking back at how their co-housing has developed, is they would have liked to have done more affordable as part of it, because making the thing stack up financially is difficult, but it's obviously not impossible.
Yes. Laura?
Yeah, and just to sort of build on what Giles was saying, really, is that I think co-housing groups need to think about their sustainability in the future. So actually, the benefits of engaging the wider community on a more ongoing basis will help them when when people do need to move on from that particular project, and they need to engage other people to come in. I think it's a really important thing for co-housing groups to think about, the future of the scheme, and not just the group that they have at that moment. So yeah,
very good point there, I think, Laura. Okay, we're getting to, well, we actually are at the time now where we're going to finish. It's gone very quickly, and I thank all our presenters. Before we just stand for a few seconds, I'm just going to bring Olivia in, because we have got some other webinars coming up, and I think one follows on quite nicely to this. We're going to have some actual case studies and people speaking from some of these actual schemes we've discussed tonight. Is that tomorrow, Olivia? Can you just let people know?
Yes, so tomorrow evening, again at 5:30, is our case study session. And as Giles mentioned, we've got Marmalade Lane and Cannock Mill Co-housing, both giving presentations there. We've also got Lavenham CLT, a completed CLT in Suffolk, coming to speak, and also Great Shelford Parochial Charities. So that's a great one if you're interested in the specifics of how actual groups have moved forwards. And then on Thursday at 5:30, we've got a Q&A panel. So if you've got more questions, feel free to sign up to that one and bring your questions along. If you go to the same place where you booked this on our website, eastoncommunityhomes.com/events, then you'll be able to book onto those.
That's great. So there's a sort of follow-up from this really, that tomorrow and the one on Thursday, they're all sort of fit together. We also have a question, will we send out the presentations? They will be available, the presentations. Is that through the website as well? They're going to be available? Yeah. So yes, we will make all of the presentations, and actually the recordings in the end will all be available as well. So if anyone's missed it or you want to share it with someone else in your community or group, they will be available. So again, I thank our presenters. I think we've had yeah.
Sorry, there's just in the chat there's a question about a model for someone wanting to set up some housing for a disabled group. I think perhaps having a chat with one of us individually about that would be really useful. Elizabeth, you want to get in touch through the hub.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of why we're here, but I think covering that in this format would be tricky.
Yes, I think.
But
obviously
yes,
we're going to be here for, I missed that, but we're here for specific questions, and definitely get in touch, and an advisor will get in touch with you. I think what we've probably seen tonight, it's all very bespoke depending on what community and what you need to get started. So we want to sort of speak to you individually as well as we move away from these webinars. We're here to help. So I thank the speakers again. I thank everybody for attending and making this such a successful session, and we'll say good night now and wish you a good rest of the evening. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.